My name is Constantine Preda. I teach episodic and reality television here at Full Sail University. Been working here for 6 years now. And I'm really excited about this morning's guest. We have Troy DeVolld, who has also written a book that he's going to talk about this morning during our panel. Troy is not only a graduate of Full Sail University and also an inductee into the Hall of Fame of 2010, but he's also an Emmy-nominated producer from the show Split Ends. His book here today is called Reality TV, an insider's guide into television's hottest market. And I'd like to have Troy just start by telling us a little bit about the current role that he's in as co-EP of Basketball Wives, and also some of the shows he's worked on in the past.
Sure. Well, the quick rundown is I got into reality television in the year 2000 when I moved to Los Angeles about 4 years after I graduated from Full Sail. I started on a show for MTV called Fear, and from there moved into The Osbournes, and after that worked on The Surreal Life and Dancing with the Stars, The Bachelor, The Bachelorette. All told, I've done around 20 projects or series. I'm currently the co-executive producer of Basketball Wives LA, and a new show called Baseball Wives, which comes out on November 30th. The sports Wives shows have done very well for VH1. We're currently the number 1 and number 2 show that they've had on the network for the last 3 years. So I'm probably going to be doing this for a little while. So that's the rundown.
Thank you. You spent a lot of your time as a story producer on many of your shows. A lot of our students don't know exactly what a story producer does. Could you describe to us what a story producer does?
Sure. One of the things I'll tell you about story producing is that you start at a different point on the show. We have story producers who work in the field. Sometimes they're called field producers. Sometimes they're titled as story producers. We have story producers that work in post. Sometimes it's the same person from the field who's working in post, but depending on your schedule, there may be overlap, and they may just be sending stuff back to me. After 6 years in the field, I decided I didn't enjoy being gone all the time, so I primarily work in post now. What a story producer will actually do, a field producer will, depending on how the show is structured, I'm going to just preface this by saying if I sound like I'm losing my mind when I talk about what I do, it's because every show is different. There isn't a solid template for what your responsibilities will or won't be as a story producer. But most of the time, if you're working in the field, you're coming up with beat sheets and things that you would like to see accomplished over the course of a week. I'd like to get a conversation about this on Monday. I'd like to have them go to this event on Tuesday. I'd like to have them talk about what happened on Wednesday. Life never follows a plan, so if something should come up, you have to be able to adapt those things in the field and try to figure out how to get story out of things that are actually happening as opposed to the things that you have on the tracks. In post, it's kind of a forensics thing where you watch several weeks worth of footage. They shoot for 2 or 3 weeks before you start, and then you just sort of go through material and try to figure out retroactively where you're seeing certain beats happen and try to figure out how to structure those and say, well, I can take this thing from week 1, this thing from week 2, this thing from the end of week 2, and turn that into a 3-beat story for the first episode. And you sort of pull everything out of a sort of a hopper where all of the scene work goes, and you're just sort of selecting things and trying to structure your stories after the fact, just for clarity.
Gotta get my mic to work. Thank you. Another quick question before we start talking about the book. A lot of my students want to make sizzle reels or test tapes or audition tapes for reality shows that they hope to eventually pitch. What can you say is the one key ingredient that helps sell a new reality show?
As odd as it sounds, you need to be as specific as you can while being as vague as possible, which makes no sense to say out loud. What you need in a sizzle reel is you need to convey. Most of the time when you're dealing with a reality series, if you're selling a personality, that personality has to come across in the reel, and it's more important than anything else that you can show people. They want to know that the person that you're trying to sell a show based around is an interesting individual. So there needs to be lots of that. The Osbournes sold based on like their sizzle reel was actually just an old interview that Ozzy had done where he did a walkthrough of his house, and the kids were sitting in the kitchen, and at the time they were probably 6 and 8. I mean, they were very young, and that's what they used to sell the show, was just, here's Ozzy at home with this interesting family. Isn't it strange to see him at home and not on stage biting the head off of something? But again, brevity, 3 minutes or less. A lot of the ones that I do are maybe 90 seconds. All you're trying to do is convey just sort of a general feel for the show, so that an executive, when you're pitching, gets an idea of what this thing could be, but you're not telling them that it's exactly this one thing. I think it's also, that's a mistake you can make, is being too specific. Because when you get to be too specific, it's a collab. I'm just spilling over into other things now. But it's a...
Spill away.
Pitching is a weird thing where it really is collaborative, whether you want it to be or not. Is you have shows that you want to try to get out that are pieces of yourself, or that you want to see done in a specific way. I have a show that I've been trying to sell for a while that has a very specific talent, and I don't think that anyone... I think that the show, if it were modified, would sell much quicker, but it's one of those things where the personality that's on there, I feel such a responsibility to them and making sure that they're portrayed accurately that I would not entertain a lot of input during the pitches, which is why the show hasn't sold. But if I go in to pitch a show and it's like, it's a reality show about a zoo, and the guy says to me, can it be a game show? We're looking for a game show. The answer is yes, of course. And then you're just, how fast can I figure out? Well, they bring out animals and it's a mystery thing. They have an animal under a sheet, and then they tell you some characteristics of the animal. If you guess it right, they pull off the sheet and you win a Jeep. It is collaborative. The goal is about to sell a show, not necessarily the show that you came in with.
The book, you've been working in television for 20 years. In reality television, you've been working for about 11 years in particular. What motivated and inspired you to write this particular book? What was the need in your mind for this kind of book out in the industry?
I read another book on reality. I noticed that the screenwriting, there's a zillion books on screenwriting, and everybody has a system. It's like, you do this, there's 15 beats to this, 145 beats to this, 9 beats to this, 3 beats to that, and this is how you write a screenplay. Okay, whatever you made up, that's fine. But reality television, there were 2 books on the subject, one of which was centered completely on selling original series, which is, to be candid, one of the most difficult things that you can do. And the other book was written by a guy who gave advice that is no kidding. If you can't get a meeting with an executive, here's how to figure out his email address so you can email him your pitch directly. Never in a million years should you ever blindly email anybody anything. And it's just, I'm reading this advice and I'm like, this advice is wrong. This is a guy who was in the business very briefly as talent on a reality show, who has written a book about how you produce it. And I just thought that, it's 60% of what's on television, depending on whose metrics you believe. And no one had written a book on the actual process and procedure of how to make these shows. And there's so much employment out there. There's 35,000 people listed on realitytvstaff.com. That's insane. That most, as a screenwriter, there's 100 and some films that get made every year. There's so much work in reality television that I have to believe it's worth exploring and worth showing people how to get into it.
You actually have a chapter 0 in your book. In chapter 0, you have rule number 1: story is story and story is written, sort of. What exactly do you mean by that?
What I mean is that in reality television, one of the big criticisms of reality television is, everything's manipulated, nothing is real, nothing is this. Story, when I say story is story, there are elements of scripting that are done in reality television, and even the shows that are the most natural are still distilled. Nothing is, you turn on a camera and you feed for 44 minutes, pausing for commercial breaks, and that's an hour-long reality show. Those stories have to be structured. I maintain that anything that you could possibly learn about structuring screenwriting can be applied to reality television. The show that I'm on right now has a 6-act structure that requires me to have a dramatic out at the end of every act, which is interesting because if you take basically 5 acts that you have to cliffhang out of, times 10 episodes in the run of a season, people don't get into fights 50 times in the course of 4 months with people that they've known for 10 or 15 years. You know, you have to figure out how to amplify things that are happening, whether it's punching them with music, whether it's, you know, making sure that you get interview content so people can better invest themselves in what's happening so that they really want to know what happens after the commercial break. The application of teases, which is something that's fairly unique to reality television. I don't watch a lot of scripted dramas where they bump out and say, you know, coming up on Law and Order, I burned myself with this coffee, come back. Story is story, and story has to be written, and in reality television, it's really no different. The only difference being, when you watch a regular show, you can remark to yourself, a regular scripted show, you go, what great writing. If you're watching a reality show, the best compliment you can pay to a reality show is not noticing that anything was written.
Reality TV gets a lot of criticism by certain individuals in the industry. But you make an astute observation. Could something down here be causing that, guys? Maybe a phone or RF signal. I think we sound pretty good right now. Let's just roll with it.
We're being jammed by.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as I started talking about the criticism, it was like, stop them from talking about it. So reality TV gets, you know, a significant amount of criticism from individuals in the television industry. However, you make some astute observations in your book comparing reality TV to scripted shows. You mentioned Californication and how crazy and absurd David Duchovny's character's life is on that show. You talk about Breaking Bad. You know, you've got a science teacher that becomes essentially a meth dealer, you know, and isn't in danger, but eventually becomes the danger. You also talked about Dexter. I mean, a serial killer that hunts serial killers. People are willing to suspend their disbelief on those scripted shows. Why do you think individuals have such a hard time buying into reality shows, other than the fact that the word real is in the title?
Well, I think. And I'm back. I think with scripted series, it's sort of like you get a wacky character or somebody who's very quirky, and you buy into it because you're expecting it. I mean, you can go to a movie and watch rubber bugs fight each other on screen for an hour, and you know that's what that is. In a reality show, I think that when I talk about, just to clarify, when I talk about Breaking Bad and I talk about these other things, people talk about Jersey Shore and they say, oh, you know, these characters are violent, or they're this or they're that, or you know, they're deplorable human beings, whatever. I think you're missing a lot of the things that they do in reality shows that they also do in scripted, which is where, at least in my shows, if someone behaves really erratically, at some point in the series, you'll see them redeem themselves. There was a show that I did called Flipping Out. Does anybody watch that show, or has anybody seen it? It's on Bravo. It was about a guy who's a real estate developer who flips houses, who has OCD, and is sort of known for having a bit of a temper and expressing himself pretty freely about when he's frustrated, and takes a lot of things out on his staff. But you'll also notice on that show that anytime that he really, you know, wigs out, there's also somewhere else in the series some moment where he has a very personal moment of a confession. The first season, he threw a party for his staff to apologize because he'd been having such a rough year because the housing market was so awful, and he choked up. And it's one of those things where you realize that there's a three-dimensional character. And I think in reality television, sometimes there's a push towards, let's just show the crazy, let's show the big stuff. I really believe that in the shows that I'm on, just like in a scripted show like Breaking Bad or Californication, if your characters aren't fragile, even your villains, at some point, you don't buy them as characters. It turns into a cartoon. And that's why I think some reality shows, frankly, suck. And you know, there are very few of them because I don't think a lot of people really approach making them from the right angle.
When I started in reality television 13 years ago, I used to get about 6 weeks to crank out a half-hour show for MTV. I just finished doing a series for Golf Channel in which I had 4 weeks to crank out an hour show, and it was structured like a competition in golf. In your book, you talk about pancaked shows. What does that mean?
Pancaking is an interesting thing where I think the story department is usually understaffed. Like the story departments, I've seen them get smaller. When I first started, it was not uncommon to have anywhere from 3 to 6 people working in the story department. Each of them would take a particular episode or a block of scenes, and they could really craft things before it went to the editors. Pancaking, I call it pancaking because it's sort of like you can pour batter into a skillet forever and it just gets wider, it just doesn't get any deeper. And what ends up happening is in order for you to use fewer and fewer story people, they just hire more and more editors to the point where a lot of scene work that we do in order to meet the deadline is me highlighting field notes and going to an editor and saying in a single paragraph, this is the intent of this scene, please try to put this together. And then I have to concentrate on the scenes where it's a party and it's 4 hours long and I have to pick and choose things that are coming through that while the editors are blowing through content that's a little more self-explanatory. And then you can't really work on it until all of the scene work comes together into a huge assembly. And then I have to, it's almost like taking your car into the mechanic. You have to figure out, what's wrong with the whole, at one time, as opposed to being able to fine-tune things as they go ahead. I don't think it's a smart way to make shows, but networks now are very impatient. And when they order a show, they would prefer to have it on yesterday. I mean, it's tough. And you get strange emails like the president of the network really wants to see this ASAP. Well, congratulations. I still have to make it first. I want you to be able to see it as soon as possible, but I also know if I send you something that's not finished, you'll probably be a little upset about it.
You do a really good job about detailing what pre-production, production, and post-production looks like in reality television, how it all goes down, how it operates. My question is, what are some things that we can learn from your book that you normally would not learn in film or television school about reality television that might actually surprise some people?
I think the most surprising thing, this particular book is written from a story perspective. I'm in the process of working on another book that's from the crew perspective. I think the most surprising thing about reality television is that story producers can start at any point in the process. I can be involved in pre-production from casting forward to starting during production and just showing up on set the first day of shooting to take my own notes, my own field notes to work from in post, which, by the way, I think is the best way to work, rather than having to depend on field notes that someone else wrote, because everything is subjective. There are sometimes you get notes back that just say great shot every third entry, and that doesn't help you at all because it saves you no time. There are also times when a story producer can start in post. What really I think is the most surprising is there is a way that you make a movie. There is a way that you make a scripted television show. A lot of that is because that's unionized and everybody's jobs are extremely well defined and extremely well outlined. In reality television, a lot of stuff is catch as catch can. It's sort of like your responsibilities will expand and contract depending on what kind of a budget they have. The crazy things that you get asked to do as a story producer. This is not a joke. I was once asked if it was actually possible to get a cadaver. And the answer is yes, it is. So
what was that for?
If you're decorating.
What was that for?
It was for when I was working on, you know what, actually I probably shouldn't say the show.
Got it.
But if you look through my resume, there's probably one show that seems more practical to have a cadaver on than most others. Not a lot of use for them on The Bachelor. So.
Another question I often get asked is, what's the difference between working with talent in a scripted film or TV show versus working with talent in the reality world? And I'd like to break it down into 2 parts, because there's your sort of non-celebrity talent, your non-actors that are in a show like a True Life show or another reality show. And then, of course, you've worked with the Osbournes and you're on Basketball Wives, so you're working with celebrity athletes there as well. How would you first, gain access and build trust between the non-actors who are on a reality show, the non-professionals, and then we'll talk about the celebrities a little bit?
Well, I'll tell you, it's because I work mostly in post. I think it's easier for me to work when I don't have direct access to the talent. When I can sort of remotely say, "Can you please have a conversation with this?" Anytime you do a pickup interview, try and make it easy for them, and trying to make it seem like you care Because I do. I mean, I don't like to embarrass or humiliate people, and I try not to do shows that are like that. Building that trust is sometimes as easy as when you do your interview questions, adding the phrase, "If you think this is correct, could you please give us a bite that's like this? And if not, can you tell us what the real story is?" That way, people don't feel like they're being manipulated or pushed. Poor story production very often involves just scripting out a number of things for people to say and saying, "Can you just say this back to me? Can you parrot this back to me?" People who have never been on reality shows before often feel very helpless because they don't understand the process. And when things start to go south or they start to have arguments with people, they start to worry about how they're going to look. And then what they do is something I call self-producing, where I've decided that I'm going to put up this facade that will make no sense when you connect it to how I react 2 weeks from now after I'm comfortable with the cameras. And then all of a sudden, people just look like they have like a major disorder. So, the difference between them and celebrity talent very often does the same thing in self-producing, but it's in their own interest. You'll have a publicist that they'll be consulting with who says, "Oh no, don't do that thing at the cake shop because blah, 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 because there was a story about you being fat 2 weeks ago." And then all of a sudden, everything that you've got mapped out has to go through some third party that's just like, "Oh, well, she wouldn't do that. She wouldn't want that to happen." Or so-and-so. She feels that there's too much conflict on the show, and she wants to make sure that you see her as a nice person who has kids. Well, if you want to watch, a nice person with kids, please let me know what the show is where there's no conflict and it's just sort of like people hanging around at the dinner table having green beans. I don't watch shows like that. You don't watch shows like that. People have to give you access in order for a show to be emotionally genuine, and a lot of times with celebrity talent, it's very hard to break through that.
What could you say, since you are a graduate here of Full Sail University, what would you say was something here at the school that really prepared you for your career?
When I came to Full Sail, I said this last year that it's very important to embrace being weird if you're a weird person. What's interesting to me is that when I came to Full Sail, I didn't come here because I wanted to learn anything technical, which makes no sense at all. I had been writing on local programs for a while, but there's only so far in life you're going to get with a resume that includes titles like Billy's Bogus B-Movies. So I came here because I wanted to learn an overview of the process. And what ends up happening is if you have a full overview of the process, it makes it much easier for you to produce because with reality shows, they're done on such a shoestring that there are times when I've had to pick up a camera. There are times, like if you work on certain shows, there is a show that's one of the top 10 reality shows where literally their story people come in and on the first day they have like a camera intensive, and then it's your job to go out and shoot it because they don't have any camera operators on the show. So you're the story producer. You're going to shoot it. You're going to cut it. Worked on a story for Fit TV several years ago that it was the same situation. As we had one girl who was our locations coordinator, the only camera person, and everything came back and it was like she had done notes, she had done everything as one person. The more versatile you can be, the more useful you are. And Full Sail was fantastic for that because I wasn't in a course of study that was so narrow and theoretical at that it would slow me down. Full Sail really kind of got the full picture, and I think that's why I was able to come up so quickly in reality once I got out of here and got to Los Angeles.
In Chapter 8, you talk about getting to work. One of the biggest fears graduates have is, how do I get that first job? And if they're looking for a career in reality television, what skills should they be bringing to the table? What should they be sharing in an interview? What is it that you, as an executive, might be looking for in somebody new to the industry?
If you're looking to get into reality television, look like you want to work. I criticize people very often that show up looking like they live out of a glove box. That it's very hard to put your confidence in somebody who's wearing a wrinkled T-shirt for a band that hasn't existed for 10 years. But as far as getting into reality television, a willingness to start at the bottom. I had worked for several years. I mean, the time between Full Sail and the time I moved to Los Angeles, I spent a lot of it as an executive assistant to the president of one of the magazine divisions at Time Warner. And I was very professional in my demeanor. That's a huge thing. They don't like a lot of bravado. They want to know that you can work as part of a team. It's not about showing off and, I know how to do this thing. I know how to do that thing. Wait for the opportunity to arise, for that to happen. Personality is huge in getting in the door. Also, I've been saying this all week, that there are people who want so badly to start at the top that it's like you would never just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to be a heart surgeon. You wouldn't do that. And it's the same thing with people who want to create reality shows. Is there are those of us that have been in this business for 8, 10, 15 years who are just now in a position where we have enough clout that we can pitch shows. So start at the bottom, work your way up, understand how the thing works, so that if somewhere down the line you do decide that you want to create shows and that you want to, to move into a position like that, you have enough experience to know what will and won't actually work, what you can and can't produce, what will or won't be, something that a network will find acceptable. And you can only learn that from putting the time in. So a willingness to start at the bottom is huge.
Great.